Ladies and gentlemen, it's exactly 11:30, so we are beginning our third plenary session. The theme is resolving regional tensions, and we have a very distinguished panel from three different parts of the world, and I will ask them in a moment to speak in the order in which they appear on our agenda. We're really honored and delighted to have General Prabowo, the Minister of Defense of Indonesia, who is attending his second IISS Shangri-La dialogue, but he also attended one IISS Manama dialogue in Bahrain. By the way, this year's Manama dialogue will take place between the 17th and the 19th of November in the Kingdom of Bahrain, and given the growing relationships between the countries of the Middle East and those of Asia, we all look forward to having a strong representation of Asians to our 19th IISS Manama Dialogue in Bahrain. Minister Prabowo also attended the first IISS Riyadh Defense Forum on March 5, 2022, which we held in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and we look forward to strengthening our links there. And for the second time at the IISS Shangri-La Dialogue, Jong-Sup, the Minister of National Defense of the Republic of Korea. The challenges in East Asia and the Korean Peninsula have been referred to already a number of times this morning, and given especially some of the ambitions announced by the DPRK recently in relation to testing its rocket and satellite technology, it's vital that we had early on in this Shangri-La dialogue the Minister of National Defense of the Republic of Korea, and attending his first IISS Shangri-La dialogue, Josep Borrell Fontelles, the High Representative and Vice President of the European Commission. We did have some years ago Federica Mogherini come, and we had some years before that Catherine Ashton come. So it's a delight for us to have the High Representative with us here. So you will have a Southeast Asian perspective, an East Asian perspective, and a European perspective on the challenges in resolving regional tensions. But may we first begin with Minister Prabowo. The floor and that podium is yours. Thank you very much, sir.
Dr. Chipman, distinguished participants of this year's session of the Shangri-La Dialogue. First of all, it is indeed a great honor for me to once again be invited to speak in this important assembly of distinguished leaders in the defense and security fields of not only the Indo-Pacific region, but also from all over the world. We see today in this meeting many ministers, many leaders, many defense and security officials, not only from this region, but from the Americas, from Europe, from the Middle East. This shows how important events like this Shangri-La Dialogue has become. I totally agree with some previous speakers that consider meetings like the Shangri-La Dialogue to be important platforms for the exchange of views, personal contacts, discreet conversations, private meetings, which are all important ways to diffuse tension, overcome misunderstandings, and create a confidence-building environment. We all, I think, agree that this world, that our Earth, has become a small planet. And we are, all of us, facing common global threats to our security and our livelihood. We have together just overcome. We have just managed to mitigate the near disastrous COVID-19 pandemic. Even at this time, experts in the medical fields and the field of microbiology warn us not to lessen our guard against these global biological threats. My friends in the medical field warn me that there are now new mutations of the original COVID-19 virus appearing again. Distinguished friends, participants, these are but a few examples, some examples of the universal threats that we will face, all of us, in this small planet of ours. Also, experts warn us that we face, in the near future, in this 21st century, crisis in energy, in water, and of course, in food supply and food security. It is imperative for us to overcome our geopolitical rivalries, our territorial disputes, through dialogue, negotiations, and win-win solutions. The Asian tradition of compromise is, I think, not really only an Asian tradition. Historically, compromise is the only way that communities and societies can prosper. Distinguished friends, the adagium that might makes right actually is not an eternal adagium. When there's a mighty power, there usually will come a mightier power in the neighborhood. That is the history of mankind. The history of mankind teaches us that compromise and coexistence is the only viable route to prosperity. Therefore, in the context of tensions in our part of the world and in the Indo-Pacific region, and also in other parts of the world, I myself actually have a more optimistic outlook. Let us be very open. The security situation in the Indo-Pacific, especially in Asia, in East Asia, is one dominated primarily by the tensions rising from the rise of China to become again a great world power. And this is interfaced with the United States' role as a preeminent global power. History teaches us when a rising great power meets a preeminent global power, tensions do arise, and the historical record shows many of these conflicts result in open conflict, kinetic conflict. However, this rivalry, some have suggested, has turned into a new Cold War. It is being called the Second Cold War. And in this so-called new Cold War, as in all wars, whether hot or cold, the danger of catastrophe is always near, especially in this age of ours, this age of advanced science and technology, of artificial intelligence, quantum leaps in new discoveries, in new technologies. In this age, any confrontation of force can very quickly result in a dangerous descent to disaster. I've been told by experts in Indonesia, even if Indonesia is not involved in any open conflict, if there is a nuclear war, the difference between those directly involved and Indonesia is we will die a slower death, but we will suffer as well. However, I am of the opinion that the leaders of the two leading powers in this great rivalry are actually wise leaders. I am of the opinion that they are aware of the burden they have on their shoulders. I am sure they must feel the weight of this burden. They are also very aware of the great history of their nations and their civilizations. China has a long and great history, maybe the longest recorded history of mankind. China has been and will surely continue to be a great civilization. The United States is also part of the Western civilization. This Western civilization has also given us, has given humankind Renaissance and the Enlightenment. Science, new discoveries that have improved the livelihood of humankind. Both these great civilizations, the Chinese civilization and the Western civilization at present now being led by the United States, have contributed to the great advance and progress of humankind. Therefore, I am convinced that the leaders of both China and the United States and the West will resolve these conflicts through compromise, cooperation, and with humanism, resulting in a peaceful resolution of their differences. I am confident that through leadership and wisdom, great statesmanship will prevail amongst the leaders of these great powers. Perhaps I can be considered one of the eternal optimists, but I do not deny that I am an optimist, because the only alternative to an optimistic view is one that I do not dare to consider. This is, I think, not only my hope, but the hope of many around the world. I would like now also to address the conflict in Europe. That is Ukraine-Russian conflict. I address this because I see many of our European friends present here in this forum. Yes, the Shangri-La dialogue has been in the past focused primarily on the Indo-Pacific region. But the presence of so many of our friends from Europe testify to the fact that security in the Indo-Pacific is affected by security and the situation in Europe, and vice versa. As I said, our planet has become smaller. What happens in Ukraine affects the livelihood of all the peoples of the world. The price of energy has gone up. The price of food has gone up. This has resulted in much suffering for many peoples of the world. Therefore, I would like to put forward the proposition that is not out of context for us to try to contribute to the resolution of the Ukraine-Russia conflict. I therefore would like to take this opportunity to urge, to recommend with utmost urgency for our brothers in Ukraine and in Russia to come as soon as possible to a cessation of hostilities. I propose that the Shangri-La dialogue find a mode of declaration urging both Ukraine and Russia to immediately start negotiations for peace. This declaration should be voluntary from all participants here representing their various countries. But I propose the general outline of the peace plan as follows. First, a ceasefire in place. That is, a cessation of hostilities in place at the present positions of both conflicting parties. Two, withdrawal 15 kilometers each from their forward positions to a new demilitarized zone. Three, the United Nations Monitoring and Observer Force to be immediately formed and to be immediately deployed along this new demilitarized zone. Five, the United Nations should organize, carry out, and execute a referendum in the disputed territories to ascertain objectively the wish of the majority of the inhabitants of the various disputed areas. And I would like to declare at this present moment that Indonesia is prepared to contribute military observers and military units under the peacekeeping auspices of the United Nations. These steps, I think, has proven in history to be effective. Let us not here put blame on any side. There are always two versions to any conflict. Both sides feel strongly of their righteousness. But for the security of the world, for the safety of the innocent, we have to achieve cessation of hostilities as soon as possible. I refer to historical examples. In Korea, a big and massive conflict was resolved by a cessation of hostilities and a demilitarized zone. Yes, the conflict in Korea has still to be resolved permanently. However, for at least 5 decades, we have had some sort of peace, which is much better than the massive destruction and the killings of many innocent people. Distinguished participants, I do not know if my proposals can be accepted, but at least let us try to put forward some concrete recommendations so that meetings like the Shangri-La dialogue will have more substance, more meaning, and can prove to be a platform that can contribute to the diffusion and de-escalation of armed conflict. Once again, because our planet has become smaller, it is more imperative for us to achieve peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Prabowo, and you open up lots of things for discussion, and it is unambiguously the case that everyone, I think, in this room will agree with your principal proposition that peace and security in the Euro-Atlantic area are intimately connected to peace and security in the Indo-Pacific zone. Minister, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. This is the Minister of National Defense of the Republic of Korea. It is my great pleasure to, to be standing here again this year from last year, and I'd like to make my speech on resolving regional tensions. First of all, I would like to extend my congratulations on the 20th anniversary of the Shangri-La dialogue. Allow me to offer my special congratulations and thanks to IISS Director General and Chief Executive Dr. Jong-Sup and his team, and the Coordinating Minister for National Security of the Republic of Singapore, His Excellency Teo Chi-Hien. Due to recent complex security challenges, the tension in the region is rising. As a result of the continuation of the war in Ukraine and historical and geopolitical factors, the security environment of the international community is facing many uncertainties. In addition, unconventional security threats such as infectious diseases, climate change, cybercrimes, and terrorism are deepening the uncertainties.
집중시키고 있습니다.
Amid such circumstances, North Korea, despite the strong oppositions by the international community, is adhering to its nuclear and missile developments. The advancing nuclear and missile capabilities of North Korea are threatening the rules-based order, which we jointly protected to this day. North Korea developed missiles with various ranges and types and carried out provocations in an unprecedented frequency and intensity from last year to the beginning of this year.
또한 3월
On top of that, 3 days ago on May 31st, violating UNSC resolutions, it fired a space launch vehicle using ballistic missile technology.
특히 북한
In particular, completing its preparation for the 7th nuclear test, North Korea made explicit the threats to use nuclear weapons, suggesting the possibility of preemptive nuclear attack through its announcement of nuclear force policy in September last year. North Korea is the only country that threatens a preemptive attack with nuclear weapons against a specific country.
입니다. 이와 같은
Such a behavior is a point-blank violation of UN Security Council resolutions. It is also a breaking of a promise made in 1991 between the two Koreas that declared denuclearization on the Korean peninsula. Not to mention, this is also an unlawful action that directly undermines the nuclear proliferation treaty preserved by the international community since the Second World War. The reckless nuclear and missile development of North Korea is increasing concerns of nuclear proliferation, causing regional arms race.
그 결과
As a result, the security dilemma of rising security costs for each country is expanding. Strengthening the ROK-Japan and ROK-US-Japan security cooperation is also an inevitable measure taken to protect regional freedom and peace from the advancing North Korean nuclear and missile threats.
피한 조치인 것입니다. 그만큼
North Korean threats are that measure a challenge that deeply agitates the structure of regional security. In addition, North Korea's human rights problems, turning graver by the day, pose critical threats to universal values and rules of humanity. The Kim regime, obsessed solely with advancing nuclear and missile capabilities, is turning a blind eye on the lives of its people who suffer from food shortage and economic crisis. Had the Kim regime used money on purchasing food instead of spending it on developing nuclear weapons and missiles, including 34 launches of ballistic missiles last year, the North Korean people would not be starving as they do today. Infringement of human rights of the North Korean people is also at a severe state. Even as I speak, North Koreans are living under the harshest reality of human rights violation, with their basic freedom and rights set forth by the UN unguaranteed.
세계인
Article 2 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states that everyone is entitled to all the rights and freedoms without distinction of any kind.
내용을 포함하고 있습니다. 북한의 참혹한
The abysmal human rights conditions of North Korea regress from the universal values that the international community seeks to uphold and damage the values of freedom, rule of law, and human rights in the Indo-Pacific. North Korean human rights challenge is no longer a problem of an individual country. Rather, it is a collective task for which all members of the Indo-Pacific must together condemn and look for solutions.
우리 정부는
For the past few years, the ROC government attempted to solve North Korean problems by relying on good faith of North Korea, that if we offered kindness, North Korea will embark on the path of denuclearization. However, the then advocated denuclearization and lasting peace turned out to be fake and unveiled itself to be undeniably false. Even when denuclearization talks and discussions for improving relations were in progress, North Korea was operating plutonium and uranium enrichment programs and continued illegitimate activities of nuclear and missile capability development.
그리고 이는 북한이
This indeed has been proven by various missile and other weapons recently revealed by North Korea. Meanwhile, the livelihoods of the North Korean population were jeopardized, human rights further aggravated. In order to solve North Korean problems substantively, we have to consolidate our intent and convince North Korea to change the thoughts and behaviors in the right direction.
가야 합니다. 이를 통해
Doing so would bring about genuine peace on the Korean Peninsula and in the region. Since the Yoon administration took office in May last year, the Republic of Korea has striven to change North Korea's miscalculation and misbehavior by pursuing peace on the Korean Peninsula. First, we are strengthening the capability and posture of the ROC military and deterring North Korean nuclear and missile threats based on a strong and overwhelming capability with our ally, the United States. These efforts are endeavors to deter North Korean threats and dissuade its nuclear development. Furthermore, our government proposed the audacious initiative, which pledges a substantial improvement of the economy and livelihood of North Korea in return for choosing denuclearization and opening the door of dialogue and diplomacy.
그러나
However, some countries are ignoring North Korea's unlawful behaviors that violate the rules-based international order. This creates holes in sanctions against North Korea passed at the UN Security Council.
또한
And due to objections by countries with important responsibilities, despite North Korea's unprecedented number of missile launches last year, not a single additional UNSC resolution was able to pass.
이러한 가운데 김정은
Meanwhile, by stealing cryptocurrencies, dispatching workers overseas, and conducting illegal maritime transshipment activities, the Kim regime is securing nuclear and missile development funds, further increasing the threats.
북한의 불법적 행
Choosing inactivity to North Korea's unlawful behaviors will worsen the security landscape of not only the Korean Peninsula and the Indo-Pacific region, but also the entire world. This will, of course, increase our security costs. Hence, along with the Republic of Korea, I ask that we convene the strength to create a change against threats by North Korea, a state turning the Pacific into its firing range. First of all, based on the understanding that the North Korean issue is a shared challenge, we must condemn its unlawful activities together.
북한의 핵미사일
Disregarding or defending its nuclear and missile development goes against the international order we together maintained. Also, we must blockade North Korea's unlawful activities by faithfully implementing existing UNSC resolutions agreed upon by the international community.
북한의 핵미사일 개발
In order to stop the inflows of funds and supplies for North Korea's nuclear and missile development, we should further reinforce the cooperation of the international community in the form of cyber cooperation and PSI. If North Korea conducts additional provocations such as nuclear test or ICBM launch, we must demonstrate the international community's resolute and united strength by passing UNSC resolutions. With such a united action, we need to change the Kim regime's calculation as following.
북한이 핵위협과 강압을 통해 얻는 이익
We must make North Korea understand that the costs of making nuclear threats and coercions far exceed the benefit of doing so. And that if they continue the illegal activities as they do today, they will only become more isolated, and that they will not be able to solve the problems that they face. We also need to make the regime realize that coercion and threats will never be rewarded, as showcased through the war in Ukraine. While at the same time, that if they open the door for dialogue and choose a novel path, bright future will wait ahead.
지금껏
So far, the process of mankind development entailed the endless journey for universal values of freedom, human rights, and the rule of law. The reason the ROC government announced strategy for a free, peaceful, and prosperous Indo-Pacific region in December last year and contributes to the regional peace and stability is to pitch in on the same journey. Nonetheless, North Korea is regressing from this journey. The instability on the Korean peninsula caused by its actions is now evolving into the instability in the Indo-Pacific and the global security. Solving the North Korean challenge is our joint security interest that will enhance freedom and peace of the international community, including the Indo-Pacific. Going forward as well, my government will deter North Korea's nuclear and missile threats with strong power and actively drawing North Korea towards its complete denuclearization through dialogue and diplomacy. Peace on the Korean Peninsula is directly interconnected with the security interests of all of us. I once again ask that the international community continue to assemble the strength so that North Korea will open the door for dialogue and choose a new path. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Minister Lee, for that very clear explanation of how the Yoon administration has moved from what might have been styled in old-fashioned speak a sunshine policy to what might be styled a dual-track policy, where the Yoon administration is strengthening ROK's capability while at the same time making an economic offer to the DPRK for peace should it follow denuclearization, and also for reminding us of an acronym that we haven't perhaps heard enough of in the last year or so, PSI, the Proliferation Security Initiative, which binds a lot of countries together in order to ensure that DPRK doesn't gain the means to further threaten your country and the region. So many thanks for that. And with that, could I please invite the Vice President of the European Commission, High Representative Josep Borrell, to take the floor.
Ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, tout protocole observé, how do we say in Brussels, and thank you to everybody. I am very glad to be here at Shangri-La Dialogue and discuss regional tensions with my colleagues from Indonesia and with South Korea. I know how important is this forum, and I also know the crucial role played by Singapore as a source of moderation and equilibrium in a region which is at the heart of the global competition today. Yes, in Europe we have a war in our borders, but the epicenter, the core of the global competition, it's in the Indo-Pacific. It's here. And I would like to start saying some words about how do I look at the international systems in order to explore how can Europeans and Asians can work together to prevent another military confrontation in the region. Yes, because the international system is here in Asia, in this part of the world where the challenges are bigger. For me, the international system is based on a dual dynamic which affects directly Asia and its security. And this dynamic is not a bipolarity, neither a multipolarity. It's both. We have both. You have a bipolarity driven, of course, by the US-China competition, a competition which is deeper than the previous Soviet-American rivalry because it covers all fields, including technological competition, which was limited during the Cold War. This competition is political, ideological, economic, technological, and strategic, and Asia is the main area of that competition. And then there is another part of the system which is purely multipolar, and it expressed that many other countries in the world becomes more assertive and refuse to remain passive, have their own national agenda, and multipolarity is the product of globalization and the wider distribution of wealth all over the world. And Europeans, we accept that reality. And we have the ambition of being a pole on this new multipolarity. We accept the idea that the world is becoming multipolar, and we have no intention to oppose the rise of emerging nations which believe that their time has come in their history. On the other hand, I know that despite the regular presence of member states of the European Union, my colleagues, ministers of defense, in this forum for many years, Europe is still largely seen as an extra regional actor with limited impact on the regional security dynamics of Indo-Pacific or Asia. And the war in Ukraine has reinforced this feeling. The feeling that now Europe is turning inward and is limiting its global exposure despite our strong messages reassessing the opposite. So I will use this moment, this speech, in order to try to express to you which are the fundamental reasons of our regional commitment based on the fact that the security today is a continuum in a globalized world. The evolution of our approach with adoption of the strategic compass and our aim for a better effectiveness in order to be a smart enabler of security and defense. My starting point is to underline that Europe and Asia have a direct stake in each other's security, and that we have to work together in order to avoid a confrontation in the region. Nothing is far away in a globalized world. As I said, security is a continuous across the space, and any war or any major security crisis in one region affects everyone, everywhere. And you cannot neither divide the economics of the security, you cannot compartmentalize, because security tensions will affect the economy, and the economy problem will create security tensions. Allow me to present some figures in order to illustrate that. This year, Asia and the Pacific will contribute to more than 60% of global growth. 60% of the global growth. It's clear that Asia is the beating heart of the global economy. And your maritime routes are the arteries of the global economy, because every day 2,000 ships transport goods across the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea to Europe and back. 2,000 ships every day. Our economic links are getting stronger. They have reached an incredibly high level, unimaginable 40 years ago. But the global security environment continues to get worse. Our economic links increase. Our security landscape is becoming more and more dangerous. There is less trust among the main players, less respect for international law and multilateral agreement. Force and coercion are on the rise. It's not law, but force, which is increasingly shaping our world. And unsurprisingly, everybody expand their military spending. Why? Because people are afraid. And they are afraid because they face challenges. And since they face challenges, they buy arms, a lot of arms. And the figures illustrate this course to rearmament. World military spending last year grew to an all-time high, reaching 2.2 trillion. Oh, you will say it's because Russia war in Ukraine. Yes, it has an effect. And certainly the military expenditure in countries in Europe is today 30% higher than in 2013, before the Russian annexion of Crimea. We have increased 30% since Russia invaded Crimea, because it was a war. But here in Asia, you don't have a war, and in spite of that, the trend of your military expenditure is even greater. Last year, the military expenditure in Asia and Oceania was 45% higher than in 2013. So on the last 20 years, we have increased our military expenditure by 30% and you by 45%. It shows clearly that we live in a dangerous world where people feel insecure, and in order to look for security and all reflex as all as humankind, they go and buy arms. And it shows that we must do more to build trust and address regional tensions. And that it is our common responsibility to defend the security principles whenever and wherever they are threatened, be it in Ukraine or in the South China Sea or anywhere else. Yes, dear colleagues, we must bring a peace to Ukraine, but a peace that could be considered a just peace. You know, I know how to finish the war in Ukraine. I know. It's quite easy. We stop supporting military Ukraine and the war will finish in a couple of weeks. But how it will finish? Does it matter? Or doesn't matter? If it matters, then we cannot stop supporting military Ukraine. Because we don't want the peace, which is the peace of the cemeteries, the peace of the surrender, the peace of the stronger, the peace that makes Ukraine a second Belarus. But yes, the war will finish. So the question is that is not to finish the war, but how do we finish the war? And that's why we continue supporting Ukraine, although we want peace as much as anyone else in this room. And at the same time, we must be sure that the Indo-Pacific stays Pacific. As the Indonesian Foreign Minister Retno Marsudi rightly said last month when we met in Stockholm for the European Union Indo-Pacific Forum. And as the Spaniards sailors, the first time they sailed this water, called it Pacific because it was surprisingly very surprised because the water was so calm compared with the Atlantic. My first point is that we have to be committed to do just that, to look peace wherever in these waters and in the lands of Central Europe. My second point is to try to explain you how the war against Ukraine is changing Europeans' role in security and defense. This is important per se, but it is also important because for you, because a more capable Europe is a better partner, including with Asia. Maybe not many people know in this region that in the last 15 months in Europe we have been broken political taboos. For the first time ever, we have been funding military support to a country under attack, providing about 40 billion of military support to Ukraine, coming from the institutions, coming from the resources I manage in Brussels, and coming from the member states. Yes, much less than the US support. But if you add up all the supports, military, civilian, economic, financial, and humanitarian, the bill of the support to Ukraine is about 60 billion euros for Europe. But let me show another figure, which is really impressive. The bill of the support that the European governments have had to pay in order to help their families and firms to face the high prices of electricity and food, the subsidies to our people in order to face the consequences of the war is 700 billion, 10 times more than the support to Ukraine, which shows that the consequences of this war are not reduced to what's happening in Ukraine, but to the shock waves that this war has been sending all around the world. We have been developing methods to increase our industrial capacity to support Ukraine. We have trained 30,000 Ukrainian soldiers during this year, and we will increase our estimated defense capacity by around about 100 billion more to modernize our armies and invest in new technologies. This is a game changer. This war is changing the role of Europe. Europe was and is a project for peace and about peace. Peace among us and a force of peace for the rest of the world. But now we face a world where the war is something that is in every corner, and these corners are close to our houses. And we have to defend our interests, our strategic domains, be it on land, on the space, on the maritime, or on the cyberspace. We don't have choices. The worst of the choice will be to look to the other side and let the history go by the bad way. Because this war could not finish by the victory of the aggressor. But our transformation also makes us a more capable partner for Asia. And this brings me to my third and final point. What can we do with you, with our Asian partners, to promote security together, to face the tensions rising from the South China Sea to the Taiwan Strait to the Republic of Korea? We see more military build-ups and more unilateral move. Yes, each case is specific, but I want to stress that the European Union will always defend international law, including the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea and the Non-Proliferation Regime. And because in our DNA, we have always favored multilateral solutions and regional approaches, we are very glad that under our strategic partnership with ASEAN, our security cooperation is a growing component. And we are pleased to participate with members of ASEAN in the regional Navy exercises. And we are happy to see that the navies of ASEAN partners work with us in Operation Atalanta, which are good examples of what we can do concretely. At the bilateral level, we have security and defense dialogues with China, Japan, India, South Korea, and others. I think this type of cooperation can be more than just dialogues, but to make them as concrete and operational as possible. Ladies and gentlemen, let me wrap up. My core message is that the European Union is a reliable security partner. We are not a classic military alliance. We are not a traditional great power throwing its weight around. We don't have the 6th or 7th fleet to be deployed in the Pacific. We are not even a state, but a constellation of states. But these states have a certain technological and military capacity that we want to develop in order to become a smart enabler, investing in shared security in Europe and in Indo-Pacific. And that is my message. You can count on us as much as you could also be part of a great coalition to ensure peace into the great oceans. We need each other. We need to stabilize this world. The challenges we are facing don't let other solution than a strong cooperation, avoiding conflict and increasing cooperation among people around the world. In Europe, in Indo-Pacific, stop this war in a fair manner and avoid that the new conflict could appear in our horizons. This would be an excellent endeavor for this forum. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Muchísimas gracias. And let me just make two quick comments on what you said in discussing the European approach to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and after having heard also Minister Prabowo's appeal, it reminds me of the dictum that when a conflict arises, it's absolutely vital to frame the issue properly from the first day. And in the first day of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, a number of Western countries stated Russia invaded a non-NATO country. They didn't say that this was a Russian imperial war of recolonization. I just wonder, had that language been used, which was consistent with the language that President Putin used in an essay he had written only the year before, in which he explained that, in his view, Ukraine wasn't an independent country, whether that might have, to a degree, changed the perspective from the so-called global south on what was happening in Europe. The second, I think I was very struck by your sort of percentage increases of defense expenditure proportionately in Europe and in Asia. I need to make a party political broadcast here, as we would say in the UK, which is that the IISS produces a military balance and has 173 countries' defense economics analyzed within it. And we will look carefully at those numbers and see if we can come up also with ones that are of equal interest. But it raises always that question as to how much of this military expenditure is just for vital modernization, and how much of that defense expenditure is participation in a competitive arms race. And that is one to which our analytical minds must here turn. We have 30 minutes left, so my proposal is that we spend 20 minutes, not more, maybe 18, hearing crisp questions and comments from the floor, and then I will return to the panel in the reverse order in which they spoke, for each of you to take 3 minutes to distill the best of what you have heard and to transmit the best that you have then available from the panel. So first, may I ask Ankit Panda from the US.
Thank you. My question is for Minister Lee. Minister, I wanted to ask you about the historic Washington Declaration that was agreed between your president and President Biden in April. There's been a lot of attention on the nuclear consultative group, but I wanted to ask you about a comparatively less discussed component of this declaration, which is the aspiration to, I quote, closely connect the capabilities and planning activities of the new Republic of Korea Strategic Command and the U.S.-Korea Combined Forces Command. Could you tell us a little bit about how efforts are proceeding on this endeavor and how you expect things to play out in the coming months? Thank you.
And from Australia, Gordon Flake.
My question is also for Minister Lee. Thank you for the clarity you had on the challenges and choices posed by North Korea. But my question is on Korea's recently announced strategy for a free, peaceful, and prosperous Indo-Pacific region that was announced last December. That strategy goes beyond the Korean Peninsula. It even goes beyond the New Southern policy of the previous government and extends well into the Indian Ocean, into the broad sweep of the Indo-Pacific. My question is, since that policy calls for a focus on comprehensive security cooperation in the Indo-Pacific, what is Korea's defense or security strategy as part of that Indo-Pacific strategy? And to clarify that, your colleague from Canada, which subsequently has also announced an Indo-Pacific strategy, made it quite clear that they have this Operation Horizon, a new strategy specifically to give security or military teeth to the Indo-Pacific strategy.
Thanks very much. And from the IISS, but based in Paris, Fontelles.
Thank you, John. Minister Prabowo, by saying we shouldn't put blame on any side of the war in Ukraine, you basically drew an equivalence between the invader, Russia, and the invaded, Ukraine. So my question to you is, does the non-aligned position in 2023 consist in encouraging aggressors? How could this provide a sustainable and just peace? And is this coherent with everything we've heard since this morning about the importance of upholding rules and order in the Indo-Pacific, and how might does not make right? Thank you.
Thank you. And from China, Ning Li.
To use a proper language and to bring some clarity, saying there is no Ukrainian-Russian conflict, there is Russian invasion of Ukraine, and there are no disputed territories in Ukraine, because Ukraine only has the territory of 1991, which was established and has not changed since then, so this is the only internationally recognized borders of Ukraine. But I think there is a major illusion also that if we have a ceasefire, as it is now, we will have a decrease in atrocities. Actually, I think that it will only bring not to cessation of atrocities, but actually to increase in them, giving Russia a free hand in raping Ukrainian women, in killing civilians, and also in kidnapping Ukrainian children from the occupied territories. So I do think that we have to be very clear in what we say. But my question will be about food security, because increased food prices have been mentioned several times. I was wondering what can be done to make Russia to adhere to its commitments under the grain deal, which it has obstructed so far, and whether we have a plan B in case the grain deal is not functional anymore. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And from Japan and also the IISS, Mariko Togashi. Mariko.
Thank you, John. My question goes to Minister Lee. I'd like to ask you about ROK-Japan relations, which is vital to keep stability in the region. Since the start of your current administration, the bilateral relationship has improved significantly in military, economy, and economic security as well. So my question is, how can the two countries build confidence that is less vulnerable to political shifts, both through military and non-military means? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And from Germany, Maybrit Stumbaum.
Thank you very much. My question goes to Mr. Borrell. The U.S. Secretary of Defense Austin this morning said that a war in the Taiwan Strait is neither imminent nor inevitable. So as you mentioned, the high importance also for the European lanes, I was wondering, how is your assessment about the proximity of a war in the Taiwan Strait, and what could be the European role in terms of military, to quote my colleague here? Would there be a military involvement of European forces in any way in the area, or what can we do about the resilience of supply chain? And I would like to give the question also to your colleagues on the panel. What could be a European contribution to ease tensions in the region? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And from Myanmar, Min Jin.
Thank you. My question is for the Minister Prabowo. I would like to draw attention to the situation in Myanmar. Since the military coup in 2021, Myanmar military regime is brutally cracking down on its own citizens. Civilian deaths in Myanmar were 8,615 until now, which is slightly higher than civilian casualties in Ukraine. Myanmar becomes a major source of instability and then a source of human rights violations and human security in the region. So my question to the Minister Prabowo is, as Indonesia is an ASEAN chairman for this year, how Indonesia can work closely together with Thailand, which is another ASEAN member, and China, which is ASEAN partner, to mitigate, or if possible, to address the Myanmar crisis, because we all know China and Thailand are two most important countries in addressing Myanmar crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And someone from the IISS who generated over the last year something we call the Myanmar conflict map. I forget quite how many data points it has, but Aaron Connolly might say so at the beginning of his question. Aaron Connolly.
Thank you, Dr. Chipman. Minister Prabowo, I have a similar question about Myanmar. President Jokowi said earlier this year that Indonesia had a particular history that it could share with Myanmar's generals about its transition to democracy. You were present during those events in 1998, and you have been an active participant in Indonesia's democracy for the last 20 years. So I wonder, in your particular capacity, what advice you would give to Myanmar's generals if you had the chance. Thank you.
And from Vietnam, Wang Thi Ha.
Thank you. I would like to ask Minister Prabowo about his proposal to set up a demilitarized zone and hold a referendum in the occupied territories. Prior to the invasion of Russia last year, these territories indisputably belong to Ukraine, and now with the referendum proposal, they would effectively become disputed areas. And I cannot help but think of some parallel that is happening in the South China Sea, where some non-disputed maritime zones are becoming disputed areas as well. So I would like to invite your comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And from Indonesia, Diandra Menko.
Yes, thank you. My questions goes to my minister, Mr. Prabowo Subianto. So from your remarks, it is intriguing to learn that Indonesia is focusing on the measures to de-escalate regional tension by proposing more open communication and compromise between two major powers. Nonetheless, it is clear that such attempts face some challenges today. In that situation, I'd like to know what roles do you expect Indonesia to play in the future to make such communication and compromise possible to take place? And in the event that things go to the undesired direction, what is Indonesia's contingency plans? Will Indonesia's defense budget be increased in the near future? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. As I say, no defense minister escapes the percentage of GDP question. So, to Germany, Johann Wadefuhl.
Thank you very much. I would also like to refer to the proposals from Minister Prabowo to solve the conflict in Ukraine. I would like to ask you, Minister, why didn't you address the Russian aggression, that this was the only reason for this conflict, and that if Ukraine stops to defend itself, the sovereignty of Ukraine would be gone, and if Russia stops the war, the conflict would come to an end. And if we follow your proposals to come to a ceasefire, wouldn't this only cement a new frozen conflict in Europe? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And sitting right behind you, the former Indonesian Deputy Foreign Minister, Ambassador to Washington, Dito Patidachau.
Thank you. This is a question to Minister Prabowo, my good friend. During a recent interview, President of Indonesia, Joko Widodo, stated that ASEAN should regard Quad and AUKUS as partners. And I believe this was a departure from the more cautious statements by the Indonesian government previously. But President Joko Widodo refrained from saying this out loud at the official ASEAN summit. So my question is, how much was that comment an off-the-cuff remark, or whether it actually represents a new policy by Indonesia to call for ASEAN to regard Quad and AUKUS as partners? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And from Malaysia, Sihat Rizan Johan.
Thank you. My question is for Mr. Borrell. You talked about how Europe is changing for the first time funding and giving funding for military support. My question is this how Europe will be in the future? Or is this because of just a specific incident with the war in Ukraine? Are we going to see more of these sort of instances in the future if the circumstances call for it? Thank you.
And from the UK and also the IISS, Nigel Gould-Davis, former ambassador to Belarus.
Thank you. A question for High Representative Borrell. It's similar to the previous question. So you set out with great clarity how Russia's war in Ukraine is transforming Europe's military and security profile. Now, traditionally, when the EU has projected power, it has been postmodern power, the power associated with trade, investment, regulatory standards, and values. So could you say a little more about what the implications of Europe's military transformation are for new forms of power it might project, including to this region? Is the implication that the EU, as an institution, might seek to project a harder form of security power? Thank you.
Nigel, thank you very much. And from the Netherlands, but also the IISS, Mayor Nowens.
Thank you, John. My question is also for HRVP Borrell. You spoke about Europe's contribution to the Indo-Pacific, but I was wondering what concrete contributions you would like to see from countries in this region with regards to European security and Russia's war in Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And from the UK, Stuart Lau.
Thanks, John. A quick question on the inability of South Korea and Japan, other Asian allies of the West, in providing weapons to Ukraine. For Minister Lee, is it a position that your country would like to change in order to facilitate this kind of weapons provision to Ukraine? And for the High Representative, how important is it for the EU to be able to facilitate this? Thank you.
Thank you. And from Thailand, Ponsudhirak Sitan.
Thank you. I have one question for Mr. Borrell. Based on what you said and along the lines of the previous questions, what would be the endgame scenarios here for the Russia-Ukraine war? What would happen to Crimea? What would the timeline look like? I have a quick question for our Korean minister. The Yoon administration's Indo-Pacific strategy, as opposed to the Moon administration earlier, does it indicate a kind of a choosing sides for South Korea now, for ROK?
Thank you very much. And from the UK, but also the IISS, Antoine Levesque.
Thank you, John. I have two questions for HRVP Borrell. First, on allocations of resources to the Indo-Pacific, you listed the extent of the EU's commitment to the war in Ukraine. Can you explain to us how the EU may conceive of making a greater commitment to the Indo-Pacific in terms of spending and capabilities in the future, given that resources are scarce and that the conflict in Ukraine is still ongoing? And secondly, on UK-EU relations, I was struck by Minister Ben Wallace's references earlier today to Europe. I wonder if you might be able to elaborate a little bit on the extent to which the EU would seek to respond to this overture by the UK and preparedness to work more with Europe, including the EU. Thank you.
Thank you. And from Japan, Ken Jimbo.
Thank you very much. I have a question to Minister Lee on the Washington Declaration in April. Given that DPRK's enhanced capability, especially on the tactical nuclear weapons, that will definitely complicate your escalation management, would you think that current arrangement with the United States is enough, or you still consider additional measures are needed? In addition to that, there has been a report that involvement of Japan in the nuclear consultative group to link extended deterrence in the new alliances. I'd also like to know your perspective.
Thank you very much. And the last question before we return to the panel from Cambodia, Chengpor Aoun.
Thank you. My question goes to Minister Prabowo. You are the chair of the ASEAN Defense Minister meeting this year. So my question may be similar to the other questioner, but how would you foresee ADMM this year under your leadership to achieve and deal with the issue like one, South China Sea, two, Myanmar conflict, and third, the lack of engagement on the defense sector between the US and China? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I think the questions and comments were almost exactly mathematically equally divided. So I would like to give each of the panelists 3 minutes to respond to them. I'll try, as I call on each, to distill the main points made just in preparation. I think, Minister Lee, you had a lot of questions about how you engage with the DPRK and how your strategy is different from what your plan is, and also about your own Korean Indo-Pacific strategy. To Vice President Borrell, a number of questions on the nature of EU power, the way it will engage with the Indo-Pacific, its thinking on how the Russia-Ukraine war might conclude, and then rather intriguingly at the end, whether you divine any emerging special relationship between the EU and the UK, given recent statements. And for Minister of Defense Prabowo, a few questions on exactly what does non-alignment mean when there is a war of aggression, and can it be possible to consider territories that are not disputed just because they are attacked? We heard that from Vietnam. Questions about whether a demilitarized zone is practical or could actually lead to more violence. But crucially, I think for you, given your position and your personal history, a couple of questions on how you would approach the resolution of conflict in Myanmar, and in particular drawing on your own experiences. I'm not certain I've summarized impeccably the questions, and each of you might have found something else that you wish to respond to, but may I ask you to speak in this order? Vice President, would you be able to address first, and then Minister Lee, and we'll end with Minister Prabowo. Vice President, muchas gracias.
Sorry, there is a lady that asked a question, I think it was in this part of the room, and I couldn't understand her. Maybe she could have the opportunity to repeat it.
I can't quite recall who that was. If she comes back, I'll let her ask the question. But on some of these other points, I think you've got some ammunition ready.
Oh, yes, I have a lot of questions. Well, this war has not changed the nature of the European Union. The European Union is not a military union. Its main resources are civilians. Most of the members of the European Union are members of NATO. NATO is the system for territorial defense of Europe. There is not alternative to NATO for that. But the member states of the European Union has also decided by the treaties to develop a common capacity of defense, complementarity to NATO, not alternative to. And that's what I am in charge of trying to push for. And this capacity of defense, pooling the capacities of the European armies, has not to be confused with the creation of the European army, which is not in the agenda. But to make the European armies in plural better together, avoiding loopholes and avoiding gaps, being more coordinated with their capacities interoperable and less fragmented, could be a good thing for the taxpayer first, because they will be much less expensive. Secondly, much more efficient. And third, Europe will be more able to face the challenges that we have to face. Some of the challenges will have to be solved inside NATO. Others, NATO will not solve it. And the Europeans should be able to have their own capacities. But I want to make things clear. Europe is not a military alliance, has the will to create a military capacity by pooling certain capacities of their national armies. And if we have been engaged in this war, it's because Ukraine is our close neighbor and partner, and because we thought that, frankly, we couldn't do the same thing that we did with Crimea, with the invasion of Crimea, to do almost nothing, to engage. And this engagement has the limit of non-belligerency, but should continue as far as Ukraine needs in order to defend its sovereignty. But the nature of the European Union remains the same. It remains the same until the point that the European budget cannot finance military supplies. So, how is it that we are doing it? Because we are doing that through a budgetary instrument which is not part of the European Union budget. It's an intergovernmental tool that can be managed, decided, run by the member states without being inside the institutional setting of the European Union.
Thank you very much. Minister Lee.
So it seems that I got questions from 7 different people. Some of the questions were overlapped, so I'll provide my answer to 4 different questions. First is regarding Washington Declaration and NCG, and 2 questions were asked regarding it. relating to nukes, jointly planning and jointly trainings and exercises and jointly executing are part of this agreement, and including information sharing as well. We have built the confidence and trust on extended deterrence much more than we did in the past, and it was a very significant declaration that we made. Then how does this relate to our relations with Japan was one of the questions. NCG is only limited to our relations between Korea and the United States that is developed to respond to the threats caused by North Korea. The second question that I will provide my answer to is regarding the Indo-Pacific strategy that Korea recently released, and how is that different from the new Southern policy from the past. And two people asked regarding the question. In the past, the policy didn't include defense and security contents. The Indo-Pacific strategy, however, it includes senior level consultations and combined exercise and trainings and defense industrial cooperation, which is all included in the defense sectors. And we seek to, it has a point of seeking further cooperation with our like-minded countries. The third point that I would like to make is regarding North Korean threats and whether pressure would be the right answer to solve this question, solve this problem. Of course, in the past, we had provided, attempted many dialogues, including humanitarian aid packages. However, it always ended as a failure. And it was always a dialogue that that lacked the genuineness. And therefore, it is important that we cooperate with the international community together when we're posing these pressures. And we have to make them realize that the cost that they have to bear in possessing the nuclear weapons exceeds the benefit of possessing those weapons, and the benefit of foregoing that weapon would be much greater than the cost that is caused by the international community's pressure. That is what our government is currently pushing for, and that is what we are requesting for as well. And lastly, regarding Republic of Korea and Japan relations improvement. ROK-Japan relations compared to the past, ROK-Japan relations should not merely focus on the issues of the past, but rather we have shared the sentiment that we have to develop this in a future-oriented manner, especially regarding the nuclear and missile threats by North Korea. We share the sentiment that this is a joint challenge that is posed to us, and that solving it together would develop our bilateral relations in a better way. Then how do we improve and develop this bilateral relations? I believe what's important about this is the trust, and how to develop the trust is through person-to-person exchanges and senior level consultations. That is how we will build and restore the trust between the two countries, and how we will strengthen the cooperative relations between the two countries. Regarding nuclear and missile threats by North Korea, we will conduct exercise together, and that is a way that we seek to develop our relations together. Over.
And finally, 3 minutes. We need to end at 12:58 from Minister Prabowo, principally on your ideas on Russia-Ukraine non-alignment and also the Myanmar issue.
Yes, John, thank you. I don't know if I can answer these questions in 3 minutes, but I will try. Several questions insinuated that I'm equating between the invader and the invaded. I think this is an emotional reaction, but what I'm putting forward is conflict resolution. I'm not saying which side is right or wrong. And I think this is being taken mistakenly, because Indonesia's position is very clear. In the United Nations, we voted against the Russian invasion. We voted. You can check our voting record. We are not talking about right or wrong. I'm just proposing that we attempt at conflict resolution, and this has been done historically. Please, our European friends, please do not think in terms of 5 or 10 years. Think in terms of 50 years. We in Asia, we have our share of conflict, of war. Maybe more disastrous, more bloody than what's being experienced in Ukraine. Ask our Vietnamese friends, our Vietnamese brothers. Ask our Cambodian brothers. Ask them how many times they've been invaded. Ask our Vietnamese friends how many times we have been invaded. Ask Indonesians how many times we have been invaded. We know war. We want to resolve. We want to help. But again, it's up to the two parties. What is the United Nations for? If not for conflict resolution? Why is a proposal for a demilitarized zone so taken as if it's not rational? We have a demilitarized zone in Korea. We had a demilitarized zone between North and South Vietnam. We had a demilitarized zone in the Sinai. We have now United States monitoring force in many countries. There are conflicts not only in Europe. There are violations of sovereignty not only in Europe. Ask our brothers in the Middle East. Ask the Africans. Ask the people of the Democratic Republic of Congo. How many countries invaded them? There are United Nations forces in the Congo. So what I'm proposing is how we try to resolve this conflict by respecting the United Nations. That's all. I'm not equating aggression with the aggressors. Please understand, we, in this part of the world, we have been victims of aggression many, many times. I think that's my answer. And for Myanmar, very clear that ASEAN has not accepted the authoritarian and the activities and the lethal actions of the Myanmarese military regime against their own people. So that is very clear. And I think Cambodia, as the previous leader or chairman of the ADIMM, Cambodia was also very clear, and Cambodia did not invite the Myanmarese political leaders to the ADIMM meeting. And I think that's our position also. And we have been discussing among ASEAN members that we should try to still engage the Myanmarese military regime, if that is acceptable to our political masters, and try to convince them to de-escalate, again, to try to achieve ceasefire and democratic resolution of the conflict. And we have given our example in Indonesia. In Indonesia, in 1998, I think we are one of the few examples in the world of a military voluntarily withdrawing from politics. A military withdrawing voluntarily from politics until today, and we are proud of it. We are proud of that. I myself was accused many times of preparing a coup d'etat, preparing, but I did not carry out. I formed a political party. I took part in 4 general elections, right? I became a presidential candidate in 2 general elections. I'm preparing to go for the 3rd time, So we are proud of that, and we want to convince our Myanmarese colleagues that the military always should defend their people and not take violent actions against their own people. Indonesian military tradition is we are a people's army. We rose from the people. We are nothing without the people, and therefore we voluntarily withdrew from politics. And we will go to the people to get a mandate of the people by the consent of the people. I think that's my answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Everybody, please thank our panelists. They've all worked exceptionally hard. And you've now also learned your lunch, and please be back in the room by 2:40 this afternoon so that we can start on time. Thank you very much.